So, you guys want to introduce or? All right. So, hello everybody, and welcome to the first presentation of the Teacher Wars book. We are going to do chapter 1, which is titled Missionary Teachers, and we hope to wow you with the information we all learned from the chapter.
Yeah, we are ready. Okay, so the 5 interesting ideas that were covered in the chapter. The first one is the feminization of American teachers. And so basically through the work of Horace Mann and Catherine Beecher, especially Catherine Beecher, she and Horace Mann, both in their different areas, opened a lot of different teaching schools, and they were mainly open to females because they rationalized that by saying that female teachers could be paid less because they only had to support themselves, whereas the males of that society had to support themselves in a family. And so they ended up saving around $11,000 by opening those schools and paying the female teachers less than they would the males. The next main idea is Beecher and Fisher's religious frustrations. And so during that time, Beecher's father is actually a really famous preacher in the Calvinist church, but she didn't particularly like Bible study. She thought it was tedious, and she didn't really understand the point of it. And so did her fiance Fisher, who ended up dying before they got married. His true passion was math and science, and they both were really interested in learning more about the world around them and less about Bible study. And so they focused more of their energy on learning about those kind of things instead of the Bible. The next thing is male teachers struggling in the classrooms. It talks a lot about how they struggled with the educational neglect because they had a really short school year. It was only about 12 weeks long. And it was 6 in the winter and 6 in the summer because a lot of the kids had to work on their families' farms and in the factories and stuff. And so they didn't have much time to learn. And there also wasn't really a way for them to have funding. And so they didn't have much supplies, and they just didn't really have the things that they needed to support themselves. And so it was really difficult for them to remain passionate about teaching the kids because they went through so many struggles. The next is Horace Mann took up phrenology, and it's apparently a fake thing, but he thought it was really interesting, and it interested him because of his ideas against Puritanism, because he didn't like how strict and unforgiving it was, but this was more, it was not as strict, and it suggested that education can save you instead of religion. And he liked that because he was really big into education and the importance of it. And that's how he justified all he did for education. The last is One Sentence Speaks Volumes. And this is like one of the really big sentences that talks about missionary teaching. And it reads, "Teaching was promoted as the female equivalent of the ministry, a profession whose prestige would be rooted not in worldly rewards such as money or political influence, but in the personal satisfaction that came from serving others." And so basically, this kind of means that the people believed that God would call you to be a teacher, and that was kind of how women ministered to the people around them. And that was kind of the big main part of the chapter, was like the ministry that teachers could have on their kids.
Our next point is slide's gonna talk about the similarities and differences between then and now. So some similarities that we noticed while we were talking about it was there's a general consensus that religion should not be taught in the schools, and that you should kind of keep that separate, and how it kind of like interferes with education. Anything else she was talking about religion, that kind of stuff. And so another point is the lack of educational funding in some areas, and we're seeing that now. As we want to be teachers, that's something that is brought to our attention daily. Is like, if you're going to be a teacher, well, you're going to have to buy your own supplies and stuff. And obviously, it's not stopping us because we believe in the greater good here. And some reformers. And some differences is an initial large male teacher population. And now we see the exact opposite, to where women are now the majority of our teachers. And she talked about how they got women to be teachers was they convinced them that women could be paid less, and now you kind of think about it, it's kind of biting us in the butt a little because now we're getting paid less because we're women, but that in the time made more sense. So and another difference, religion was taught in the majority of the schools. shorter school year, so there was only 12 weeks, and now we go 180 days. And there's a wide age range in the classrooms.
So the major players, there was Catherine Beecher, who was the teacher of domestic arts for her, that was like her first job. And she taught things like knitting and painting, but she really hated it, and she thought that like a woman should go outside of the home. So she was really passionate about like educating females and like females being important to society. And she eventually went on to define public education as America's like more gentle church with female teachers as the ministers of American morality. So kind of like comparing women to like preachers, but like education wise. And then she also like festered the idea that public works like serve society to get you to heaven like just as well as faith, so that anti-Puritan thing. And then she opened the door for women to teach, and she opened the Hartford Female Seminary, which was like the first place where women could actually go and learn. She sparked a movement for missionary teachers, and they basically were like, you need to go out west and educate these people that live in the frontiers because they don't have any like, they're all spread out and there's no like consensual place for them to go and learn. And if they don't have a Sunday school, it's your responsibility to give them one. And she gave like that to the west. And then her ideas were good and needed. We don't think she should have dismissed the Bible as much as she did. Just because her father was a pastor, she kind of like dismissed it completely, and she didn't think there was a lot to learn from it, but we disagreed with that, and we think she took it for granted when she was upgraded.
Then there was Horace Mann. He supported schools for deaf and blind through the Whig Party. He thought that schools were the primary way to improve society. Established state board of education that required compulsory enrollment of all children. He opened Prussian-style normal schools to train teachers. Mann was kind of all over the place, but took a more political approach than Beecher. We imagine him as a slightly eccentric philosopher who rejected Puritan beliefs, even though he ended up embracing them in the end.
So generally during this time, the mentality of the teachers and students for each group was actually kind of split. For the teachers, it was split because the men, or the men during this time, they had more of a negative mentality. They were upset with the fact that the schools weren't funded very well, and they were also upset with the short school year, and so a lot of them were just frustrated and just really bogged down with everything, and so their mentality was really negative towards education. On the flip side, a lot of the women, most of the women had a positive mentality. They wanted to go out and actually change education. They saw education as a flawed arena, but they could fix it. They wanted to fix it. They wanted to make it better. And so a lot of them were very positive, and they wanted to make good changes in education. And a lot of that has to do with the ministry. A lot of the women felt like they were called to go into education, whereas the men wanted to leave education, a lot of them. And the students were also mixed as well. Some were pressured and others were restless. And I say that because the ones that were pressured were the ones that were, they experienced the religious aspect of education, and they really forced religion in those classes, and it was really strict, and they felt really pressured by all the things they needed to follow, all the rules they needed to abide by, so they were very pressured. They didn't really like that, and also restless. Some of them were restless. It even says that Horace Mann, he actually was observing a class, and the class was full of kids from ages kindergarten through middle or high school, and they were all in the same class, and they were all restless, and the teacher could not control them, and they didn't want to do anything, and so they really, during this time, they really didn't like the classroom, and they were really hard to handle. So that was the general mentality of the time period, teachers and students. And then, you go.
Okay. So the last thing we have is society's feelings towards education and teaching. So society felt a lot like the teachers and the students, and they had mixed feelings about it. Some of them felt like religion needed to be pressed more in education, and some of society didn't really care about it, which is why there wasn't much funding, and the school year was really short because they just felt like there were so many other things that took precedent over it and that were so important, that were more important than it, having their kids work on the farm or in the factory and make money for their families. But then others saw hope for education, and they were like the people that were like Man and Beecher that wanted to reform it and to make it better because they saw how important it was, and they saw the positive effect that it could have in people's lives, and they saw that that was the best way for people's lives to change was through more education.